Maddison here, Rick and friends, and I would like to welcome Murray Wilson to the show. Murray Wilson is a retired registered professional forester who completed his working career as the BC and Manitoba Stewardship Manager for Tolko Industries, local company. He started his forestry career on a wildfire suppression crew in 1977. Over the following decades, he worked in a variety of forestry positions ranging from operations to woodlands manager. Murray received a forest technology diploma from Selkirk College and a Bachelor of Science in Forestry from the University of Alberta. So, in essence, you know what you're talking about.
Well, I try. Thanks for having me, Rick.
So, Murray, what I wanted to do is chat about this. Obviously, we lost a lot of homes last summer. I myself, in 2003, lost my home. So I'm very invested in the space as far as policies regarding forest mitigation suppression. And I think a lot of people watching this, they realize we're surrounded by forest. And so over the last few years, it seems like we have a forest fire every year. And what we're doing isn't working. But I want to bring it back a little bit. You were watching House of Commons yesterday, and you saw a $15 billion investment in a plant in Ontario. I just wanted you to chat, because we had an interesting chat before the show started about what a real carbon outlay is, and forest fires rank pretty high.
Yeah, the carbon emissions from wildfires in Canada this year are over 2.3 billion tons of carbon. So that's just a big number. What does that mean? Well, all our carbon emissions from all other sources in Canada are 670 million. So basically less than a third of what we're emitting from wildfires. So for our efforts to reduce greenhouse gases, which we want to do, to be effective, unless we address wildfires, we're not going to be successful. If the carbon taxes that we have, getting rid of electric appliances or promoting electric appliances, building a $15 billion electric battery plant in Ontario, for me, we're not addressing the elephant on the table, which is three times the emissions coming from wildfires in 1 year alone. So we're not putting the money. So if I look at that $15 billion that we spent, they are going to spend in incentives to build a battery plant in Windsor, Ontario, and provide 2,500 jobs. For me, I look at that and say we'd be far better off investing that $15 billion in forest management. And what does that mean? That means we need to reduce the age and density of our forests. And there's a lot of wins there. If you look at it, you look at a country like Finland, where they've had, they're a third of the size of British Columbia. They harvest more timber, but they're averaging about 300 hectares a year of area burnt, where we're averaging in the last decade 500,000 hectares of area burnt. So over 1,000 times more than what they're doing. But they also have bioenergy plants. So if you look at it, throughout taking that $15 billion we're investing in a battery plant, if we invested that into forest management, a lot of our small communities, Barrier, Clearwater, they could have bioenergy plants where we not only reduce the density of our forests, get rid of the non-commercial wood, right now commercial, and process it in plants. We can have electricity coming into those communities, we can have jobs in those rural communities, and we can significantly reduce greenhouse gases and wildfires. Seems like a win to me.
But it doesn't get you votes in Ontario. That's the problem. The other part I want to talk about, and this is just the pushback that you often get from various groups, is, okay, well, we don't want logging. We feel like we're hurting our forest if we log and do it this way. This is just a capitalist exercise. What do you say to the naysayers that say your forest management practices are not, they're not helping our forest?
Well, I think one thing in Canada that's unique in the world is government ownership. So in British Columbia, 95% of the land base is Crown land, or owned by the government, managed by the government and Indigenous peoples. So there's a lot of control mechanisms in there. And right now in British Columbia, about 25% of that land base is available for forest harvesting. And it has lots of rules and regulations. We're really good at developing rules and regulations. So you've still got another 75% that is basically not managed at all. So my point would be, let's manage that 25% or more very, very intensely. And we can create jobs, we can create, we create a reduction in wildfires. And we also have it's a green product that we're producing. If you look at it, it's renewable, it's recyclable. It meets all of the tests that we need. So for me, I look at forestry and say, this is the model we need for a green economy. And reluctantly or unfortunately, it's always come down to people don't like the looks of forest harvesting. But really, if you're a forester or someone that spent a lot of time in the forest, you know that it goes through various successional stages. It gets young, it gets teenage years, it gets to be an adult, and then it gets old, and then it needs to start over again. And I think people look at the forest and think that it always stays the same. It doesn't.
So a lot of people watching this are saying, okay, who is this guy? Now you're retired, okay? So is anybody paying you to say this, or so? I mean, your letter, you sent in a letter which started this whole process of me wanting to interview you, because you were critical of the current practices, but what is your gain by speaking out about what the current practices are? Like what do you gain, or why are you here?
Why am I here? Yeah, I mean, I'm retired and I was enjoying golfing and skiing in the winter and playing some old timers hockey, but I think just a general frustration for me looking at it, saying there's solutions here, and it's like the John Candy movie, we're going the wrong way when the guys are down the freeway, and I'm going, like, why? This is common sense. What I'm saying today is what foresters know across the province, across the country, and across the world. Forest management is the solution, a very strong solution to reduce wildfires. And we're spending lots of time and energy on reducing greenhouse gases, while we're ignoring our biggest source of greenhouse gases. And also, it's damaging our economy significantly and damaging our environment. Some of these fires that are coming along are so intense that trees, foresters and ecologists are estimating won't grow trees back for another 60 years. And there's erosion that happens, there's water impacts, there's all kinds of impacts that happen. I'm saying we can reduce those, and we can have a win-win. We can reduce greenhouse gases, we can enhance community safety, we can have a win for the environment, we can have a win for our economy. I'm just going, why aren't we doing this? So frustration is what really drove me to this.
Well, I'm glad you're frustrated. And again, with your legacy of experience, it helps, people like myself, again, house burned down. I didn't like it. And I think, again, going back to it, the policies currently aren't working. So I'm looking at this through the lens of, why are we doing the current policies? Like, I mean, is the government, do you feel like the government is not collaborating, is not consulting with the forestry sector? Because I think these answers that you're talking about are not new. Like, they're not, you jokingly said, I didn't come up with these.
No, I think over the decades in British Columbia that forest harvesting has been very controversial, and there's been a lack of information. I like to think that over time, that if you've been here for a while, you see the various stages and it comes to make sense. But people don't like, for the general part, the idea of saying, I'm going to go down and harvest trees and then grow them back, and they don't like the looks of it. So I think it's an easy button if you're government to say, I'm not going to anger people, I'll just do the easy thing. Mm-hmm. I'll protect areas. But the reality is, when we're saying that we're protecting areas, I don't have the statistics for 2023, but 2017, 18, and 21, wildfires in British Columbia burnt over 650,000 hectares of parks and protected areas. We burnt over 170,000 of old growth management areas, and we burnt about 260,000 areas set aside for visuals where you're supposed to not see harvesting. So over 1 million hectares of area that we said, okay, we're going to put a fence around this, a paper fence, administrative fence, and the fires won't go there, but they will. And I mean, they don't recognize the difference between what we call the timber harvesting land base, where we can harvest trees, and areas that aren't. So protecting areas, to me, the best way to do that is to manage them and, figure out the management criteria for them. But just simply setting areas aside and saying it's going to be good is not real and not reality.
So going back to West Kelowna, and you know, if we knew what was going to occur, which is I think the loss of 197 or 200 homes, what sorts of practices or policies that could have been employed, say 3-4 years ago, to minimize? And I say minimize. I'm not sure if it would have, completely taken away the fire. But is there anything that you would have done differently going into last year, this last summer, where these practices that you're talking about, just so people have a very clear idea of what outcome would happen if you employed these principles?
Well, I think there's a excellent TED Talks if the listeners are looking at on YouTube. There's a Paul Hesburgh, a forest ecologist out of Wenatchee, Washington, and I've been at conferences with them and spoke with them. And you need to address the landscape. You need to look at it and say, if your landscape is getting old, you need to make it younger, and you need to take and in British Columbia, we've risk rated most of our stands, so they know the government and knows the flammability of them. They know the potential to have fires. Address those stands.
What's a stand? Sorry.
So a stand would be a forest type. So they would look at it and say, here's an area that has similar tree species and age and composition. So they would be typed in. They say, and there's hundreds of thousands of polygons across the province, and they've identified all these polygons and identified what their risk of burning is. So there's an easy one right off the bat. Target some of those areas for forest management and forest harvesting. So I think that's a big solution. As far as the McDougall Creek fire, I mean, I'm not an expert on that particular area, what happened there, but over the years, West Kelowna has been doing, removing debris and stuff there, which is a good thing to do. But the biggest thing for me is when I was young, I was on fire attack crews, and I learned really quickly that if a fire starts, you have to put it out quickly. Put all your resources onto it, hit it hard, hit it fast. And if you don't put it out when it's small, then really the only way that you put it out is Mother Nature comes along and a wind changes or it rains or something like that. So the big solution for a lot of these fires is to hit them very hard and very aggressively as soon as they happen. And maybe that happened there, I'm not sure.
So common sense tells me that if you talk about forest management, which is harvesting a forest, means taking the old growth or the older trees and then putting them to good use, which is, commerce and employing people and all that kind of thing. And then based on the policies, I think they have to plant new trees, which is in itself creates another fire break, I understand. This just seems to be a common sense practice. Like, I mean, I don't think we're reinventing the wheel here, but it feels like, again, I keep pushing against the wall, which is I'm not sure why there continues to be, because I think the headline is the government is trying to get even more land protected, which means the NDP government provincially. And what are your thoughts on that? More protection that they're trying to employ?
Well, I think there's a couple of announcements recently. There was a tripartite agreement earlier this month between the federal government, BC government, and Indigenous communities, and that's in around $1 billion is what I've seen. I don't know the details of all of it, but it's focused on protection, on more old growth protection. And there's also a crowdfunding agreement announced by our premier in the province. The province is going to pay $150 million towards it, and they're looking for crowdfunding sources from parks groups for another $150 million, all targeted on setting aside more old growth. And my response to that is, I don't know the details of what that's going to look like, but I would think in the interior of the province, we have what are called biogeoclimatic zones, and they're typed by species composition, tree species, and elevations, and their growth capabilities. And the ICH, interior cedar hemlock zone, is probably our best growing sites, and I would assume those areas would be targeted to be hands-off for harvesting, and that'll have significant impacts if you're a cedar manufacturer, stuff like that, where you get your product. But even more so, I think we've proven that putting administrative boundaries around areas and not managing them doesn't work. They will burn eventually in our interior things. Now, the interior cedar hemlock zone gets less frequent fires because it's moist, but if you're on for the climate change conversation at all, the pattern is our summers are supposed to get warmer and we're supposed to get more fires. So if that's the case, it seems to me that the urgency should be put into how do we manage these areas rather than just putting boundaries around them and say they're going to stay the same, because they won't. So my criticism would be, have we not learned anything? Like, we need to start managing our forests instead of pretending that they'll just be fine on their own.
But hold on though, Murray, if the government protects them, they won't burn. You put up that barrier and says this forest is protected, this one isn't, you can burn there. Like, that's the kind of sense we're talking about here.
Yeah, I think, like I've said earlier, I don't think we like the answer. We like the answer that it is all of us. I mean, seeing old big trees is spectacular. I mean, I'm a forester. You see those big trees that are magnificent. But we've also changed the definition of what old growth is. And in parts of the interior now, an old growth tree can be as young as 140 years old. And if I showed you what an old growth tree is in some of these classifications, you would say, that doesn't look particularly special and unique to me. I'm all for special and unique areas. We've already set aside 3.8 million hectares for old growth in the past. We've got another 2.4 million hectares, I think, that's being deferred. So, and then we're going to add more on top of that. And just for your listeners, what is a hectare? Because I'm throwing that number out randomly. And if you're here in Kelowna, you drive by the Apple Bowl and you look at the football field, that's about a hectare. Okay. So when you're talking about, we've already deferred, or we've already set aside 3.8 million football fields of old growth, and we've added another 2.4 in deferrals, and we're going to add more. We've got a lot of football fields of forest. So you really have to ask, do we have enough? And I mean, part of it is that the government, federally and provincially, is going with the United Nations declaration to get 30% protected area. Before we were targeted 12%. Now we've moved it up to 30%. Well, the 30% protected area, we have that in the province already, from my knowledge. I mean, it's not all defined as protected, but there's areas we just can't physically go and do forest management. There's steeper areas and stuff like that. And part of the idea behind the 30% protected areas is it was going to be equally distributed across different zones, but we're very much focusing on our more productive sites.
And you mentioned it was hemlock. Is that?
In the interior parts, the old growth in cedar is called a cedar hemlock zone. So it's usually cedar and hemlock. And on the coast, I think they're focused more on the hemlock zone down there.
So we have this two words, which is old growth. And whenever I see the headline for old growth, it's interesting to me because it's got a romanticized feel to it. I mean, when I hear old growth forest, I'm like, I've imagined in my head this place that's only been seen in Disney movies, where there's birds fluttering and there's beautiful trees that are big and bold and beautiful and they're just full and they're just rich. But what is truly an old growth forest when it comes to an ecosystem? Like what? Because we talked about a lifespan of a forest, so I think a lot of people misunderstand what old growth actually means when it comes to forestry life, I guess.
Well, old growth is a very complicated topic. I mean, there's lots of definitions and lots of passions around it, and we have different zones in the province where different tree species grow, and in those zones, they have different disturbance regimes. There's probably 5 different disturbance regimes. So some of them, like around Kelowna, if you looked at the ponderosa pine areas around the communities, they would probably have frequent fires, probably every 15 or 20 years would burn through here and clear off the understory. And if you look at old photographs, you can see that our forests around these communities were far less dense. There were less trees. We have more trees now. I think that's one thing that people are forgetting. We've got a lot more trees than we would normally have. And as you move up into elevations, if you're at Big White, you're looking at spruce balsam trees that, maybe every 200 years or so, there would be a large fire that would turn that area over again. Some of the wetter areas on the coast, old growth areas, hundreds of years old between disturbances, 300-400 years that can happen. So you really have to recognize what zone you're in, but eventually all of them turn over through some kind of disturbance. My sense, or my thought is that we can create those disturbances ourselves and have controlled disturbances through forest management versus the uncontrolled a disturbance through wildfires. When those wildfires happen, they're often at the hottest and driest time of year. And if they get bigger than a very small size, we can't control where they go and the impacts they have. Whereas if we manage the forest, we can influence that disturbance.
So it's, the government, and again, these are people that are elected into office, and they have to maintain some semblance of popularity to maintain their position of power. This is a very unpopular subject. I mean, it's one the politician feels, perhaps, and I'm guessing here, that they just can't win in. But if we had perhaps new government, and I'm not suggesting we change government, of course, but if we had new government, I wonder if new policies, new perspectives would come into play where they go, wait a second, what we're currently doing doesn't work. And they acknowledge the fact that maybe we should take another look at this. Is there hope on the horizon in your eyes, Murray?
Well, I'm definitely not a politician, but in over 30 years in the industry, I would say that every elected government that we had changed our forest policy one way or the other, and which is not a good thing for forest management because it's a long-term approach. So it makes it very challenging. I mentioned earlier, 95% of our land base is Crown land, so it becomes very political. So our forest policy changes not based on what's best for the forest, but what's best on the political climate. So I would say, at our next election, if we get a new party in power, will they change forest policy? History shows that they always do. So whoever we get will change it. And that's the frustrating thing, is we really need a long-term look at what we're doing. Mm-hmm. And we have this incredible resource that, other parts of the world, I think we have a responsibility to manage it, but somehow we've chosen that the management should just be, let's do nothing. And that's not working.
So if, let's just say that it was just you and I chatting away, and there wasn't cameras on us or what have you, is there a message that you would like to implore our current leaders to perhaps just look at? Like if you were able to take a premier or even a prime minister, take them aside and say, listen, I just want to talk to you about some forest management policies. If you had a few moments, is there an elevator speech that you could give them to just say, I'm Murray Wilson, I'm retired, I have no skin in the game. However, I just want you to listen to just this little anecdote, this little jewel, this little gem, and just so that they can understand, because again, I'm frustrated. I think a lot of people are frustrated about the constant threat of wildfires, and it's unnerving. So if you were able to chat with them, what would that look like?
Well, if I had that opportunity, my best wish would be that, say, come out in the forest for a day with me. That would be my best wish. And I think that's for anyone to go out in the forest. If you got an opportunity to go out with somebody that's a forester, technician, or forest professional, to explain what you're actually seeing. I think there's a lot of misinformation on what's happening in our forest, and the best way to do it is actually show somebody, because there's people that are way better speakers, way more convincing than I am, and to go out there and say, this is, if you can actually look at it. And I've taken people out in the past. I remember 25 years ago with Peachland Watershed, where there was lots of controversy, and there still is today. And I remember taking the town council or city council out, and one of the fellows at the end of the day said, are you the best? Like, is your company the best? And I said, well, I think we're pretty good. He says, but I think other companies are doing the same thing. And he said, well, because what you've shown me today makes sense. It's common sense. And I said, it is. But I said, the reality is a lot of our discussions are based on people debating, and if you take them actually out in the field and show them what's going on. So if I had the elevator speech, I hadn't thought about it, but I would say that we have a tremendous opportunity in this province and in this country. We can make our communities safer. We can reduce the impacts of wildfires. The wildfire impacts on not only the environment, but all the impacts for like the wine sector, the tourism industry, insurance providers. Everybody's impacted by these wildfires. People don't want to come back to the Okanagan for holidays because they say, I don't like the smoke, or people are leaving the country because they don't handle the smoke anymore. And there's health impacts to that. So I would say we have the opportunity to reduce that And we also have the opportunity to have a win-win. We can reduce greenhouse gases. We can grow a very green, friendly industry in this province. We can create more jobs. And all we have to do is, it's a big ask, but we have to change our policy to focus on forest management by reducing the age and density of our forests. Make our forests younger, not as thick. We'll have less fires. We'll create wealth for the province. It's just a win-win.
Thank you, because that perfectly summarized what I think really the essence of what we're talking about today. The other part, so just for fun, devil's advocate, why wouldn't somebody look at this as an idea? Why wouldn't, like, and again, I'm asking you to speculate, and if you're on the stand in trial, speculation, Your Honor, but I'm just wondering, why on earth would they not, would these, and maybe it's partisan, I'm not sure, but why wouldn't we look at this? Why wouldn't we think about this?
Well, I think years ago, probably 20, 25 years ago, there was an American forester engineer came up here and he gave a talk, and his family business was being shut down in Montana over grizzly bear concerns. And I'll never forget, he said, the world is run by those that show up. And it really struck home with me, because I looked at it and I say, most of us, 80% of us, are pretty happy. I'm a retired guy, pretty happy staying at home, don't want to say anything, life's good. But there are 10% or less than that of the population that is very, very vocal, very speaks up, and politicians have to listen to those people that come and talk to them. So those 10% are very vocal, very persuasive. So government says this is what the people must want. And the rest of us say we're not happy with it, but we don't do anything about it. So I think I think that's a big reason why we don't move forward, is because most of us don't say anything. And there are people that say a lot of things. So if you're satisfying your critics and you're a politician, then life's a lot easier than if you don't satisfy your critics. Well put.
So I'm so happy you wrote a letter. Like it upset you enough to write a letter and start this whole chain. So happy you got off the golf course.
Well,
I'm not sure what your handicap is, but I so appreciate you sharing your wealth of information, because again, further to that point, I'm just glad we were able to get these thoughts and ideas and hopefully maybe change some perspectives around some policy tables, because that's, again, I can't say this enough, it's not working. And I would really love it if these common, I don't want to use a campaign slogan right now, but practices built around common sense in forestry management hopefully come to a table, and hopefully people start to listen, that there's truly proven ways. I think anything you're talking about is proven.
That's right.
And I just so appreciate you taking the time, Marie, and hopefully we'll get you back on the show again.
Well, yeah, thanks very much for having me. I guess if my elevator speech to a listener would be is that, wildfires impact all of us. And I would encourage people to spend a bit of time. If you're listening to this, you're already doing that, and provide some common sense to your politicians, local and provincially, and say, we want to see some changes. And, from an industry perspective, not the forest industry, but it impacts all of our economy. And it doesn't need to impact it. That's my point, is we can actually make it a positive impact, and we need to start doing something now. We can't keep waiting.
Thank you. Thanks again for watching, and talk to you soon.
Thanks.